probably should have done that first because now everybody sees my disorganization.
Your Discord.
Now recording.
Oh, no, that's interesting. Discord Discord has changed their interface again.
Yeah. Yes, they have.
Yeah,
I was just complaining about that.
Yeah, Eric was just complaining about that. Yeah.
That's a tough thing to do, especially with folks like us, because you get used to a workflow and then, well.
Yep.
Audio check. Do I sound good?
Yeah.
Not too loud.
Right, actually. Yeah.
All right.
No.
I haven't touched any of this in about a week, so.
Been in Texas, huh?
Well, we did the truck show last weekend, which that was fantastic. And so I've been on. Yeah, I wasn't in Texas this week, but I did do Alabama and Missouri, and it's all over the place. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get the party started. Episode 49. All right, I'm gonna do a 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. And again, it's not really necessary because I haven't had to use any noise reduction since we've started using Craig.
Yeah.
Just because it's been a zero, that gives you a zero noise floor every single time, which some people argue is not the best way of doing it, but whatever.
Well, so that's actually something I picked up on after a while. I got a lot of feedback on that, and I have noticed it. Not so much with you and Majid, it's with Joe in particular. There's a very stark difference between when his mic is on and off. And so you can really hear that
He's
open and close effect.
He's got a lot of background noise going on in his place.
So for him, like when he's talking, like he pauses, it goes quiet and there's zero noise, and then it opens back up and it's kind of jarring versus. And so there's actually a way, and I know you're not mixing it that way right now, but you have to do like this back mix and like you let some of it bleed back in, and it's like this whole goofy thing, but it actually does work pretty well, but it's just not worth it. I ended up driving myself crazy with over editing to the point where I was spending like 10 hours to edit like a 40-minute podcast. It's like, what am I doing?
I just don't have the time. I do not have the time to sit and because I want to play with that stuff. I want to see if I can doctor it up any, but I mean, nobody in the audience
is
all it complaining.
It was just me nerding out. Yeah, I mean, the audience, I don't even think they cared, to be honest with you.
I've noticed it too, that and his smoke detector.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, please give him a battery.
I know, man. I'm half tempted to send one from here, but then I don't know what your tariffs are going to be.
Yeah, $30 for a 9-volt battery.
Yeah. And you guys are talking about the innards, and it's this beep. I'm like, oh, Joe, come on, man. It's been weeks.
He was talking about doing it because he had a day off or something like that. Yeah, I'm thinking about doing it. I got a day off coming.
How long does it take to get a stepladder out?
My family would not let that go for 5 minutes, let alone.
No.
That's been months.
Not a chance.
That's been months, dude.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, well.
Linux OTC, welcome to episode 49. I'm Bill.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Majid.
We got to figure out a way to fit all that other audio in somehow, because it was good stuff. We waste so much content.
I thought that too. I was like, wait, we hadn't started yet.
Oh, but we do that every time, and I've heard other people.
Yeah, great content before the show, great content after the show. It's just the way it is. That's why I actually want Bill to just come on, and before he even says anything, just say Linux OTC, because then everything we can just kind of bring it in. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe I should just. maybe I should just record podcasting. I should record a more generic intro, and then just keep that and put that on the front of every single show. That way, it doesn't matter because it's always going to be that way. It's always going to be.
Well, we're definitely consistent when it comes to like not catching stuff, or at least doing stuff before we technically start. Yeah.
There used to be this mobile phone podcast called the Modoko podcast. It was named after a ROM. Maybe the guy was involved in the ROM. I can't remember, back in the day. Anyway, and you'd kind of, you'd subscribe to the podcast and you'd put it on, and there'd be no beginning or end. There'd be no hi, welcome to Modoko. It would just be stream. People they've already just started talking, and it's just like, I bet someone just got in there and then they've just pressed record, and then just whatever the hour they talked about, and then they just put that back in. It's just like, I mean, it was all right. But it was a little bit disorientating initially, because it's like, am I at the beginning of the episode? Have I cut something off?
Yeah.
Have I downloaded it properly? Do you know what I mean?
Whose voice is that?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
There are shows out there that really don't have a clear beginning. You feel like you're jumping into the middle of a conversation right at the beginning, and
whilst here we don't have a clear beginning, middle, or end.
No,
that's right. Nothing's clear.
As Eric said, we're consistent.
That can be done well. I mean, it can, if it's conversational and it feels natural, like that is kind of, it's, pulls you in, and it's kind of compelling to listen to. But there are also times where it just feels lazy. Yeah. It's just like, oh, well, you obviously didn't want to edit.
You just can't be bothered. Yeah. Yeah. I was just telling Eric, I still haven't edited the episode, Bill, but that's because I've had a crazy couple of weeks since the last episode. We had some issues at the hospital. Family stuff was going on. Then we had a death as one of our colleagues. It's just, I literally completely forgot about it until yesterday afternoon, when I thought, I'm going to be on OTC. Bill's going to ask, oh crap, I haven't done it. All right. Okay.
No, I wasn't, because actually, I mean, I've been dropping the ball on that too, because I'm supposed to get your website up and running, and I've had my head up my ass with the truck show and everything like that.
How did all that go, the truck show and everything?
It was fantastic. It's our third time going down there for that. It's hard to believe I've been podcasting for going on 4 years now, but
where's there?
The Mid-America Trucking Show. It's a trade show, but it's enormous. It's down in Louisville, Kentucky. They've got an enormous expo center down there. We set up a booth. We set up like a 10 by 10 booth with all the, we've got equipment that makes us look proper. We've got backdrop, and
it must be AI generated. That makes it look proper.
Not a piece of it is not a bit of it. Though moving forward, I'm not sure there's gonna be some changes, because we've been offered. Okay, so a 10 by 10 booth costs you about $1,500 at this show. We've been offered sponsorship. I don't know if I should talk about this, but I don't imagine anybody will care. We've been offered a sponsorship with a company that makes diesel fuel additives, and we're going to have like I think it'll be like a 70 by 70 exhibition where we're going to be up on a stage, and they'll have their products down and around. I'm already shilling for these people because they're bankrolling this whole thing. You're at about like the $30,000 range for an exhibit like that at this show. So they're dropping some serious money.
But they're obviously thinking they're going to recoup it all and make more, because you don't spend that kind of money unless you're thinking you're going to be making good money.
Yeah, I think that they're probably going to do well from it, because they spend a little bit on their exhibit anyway. They usually get the triple size booth and all that. They've never spent this kind of money though. But there's a lot of big in the trucking space. There's some kind of big time content creators, and they all come down and they set up, and they've got kind of a similar situation where they've got their kind of, not necessarily a booth, but they've got like tables set up with all their equipment, and then chairs set up. Like the one guy, there's one real popular guy named Steve Summers, and he's the son of a guy that used to do a show on AM radio called The Truckin' Bozo. And he's syndicated and he's live and he's got an app that you install and listen to him live and people call in. It's very old school, but he's not doing radio anymore. He's doing all podcasts, Facebook. I mean, it's like zero money out of pocket and zero barrier to entry. Mm-hmm. But he does a similar thing where he's got a product that is kind of set up around him, and they're the ones actually paying for the exhibit and everything. And he's kind of set up, and he's got truck seats sitting there for to do interviews in. And Dave and I sat down, and he did an interview with us. So we're going to have a similar situation. We're going to have to sink some serious money over the next year in cameras, because right now we're kind of making it where it looks good. What we do looks good, but it's not on the level of these other guys, because they're all using DSLR cameras and everything like that. And here we are.
There's a level, though. So not to cut. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think some people go way too insane. Like you see YouTubers and people like going in on like red cameras and stuff, and like that is just bananas. You do.
Uh-oh.
Okay, he's just frozen there.
If that's like, sorry, and I know that you guys, like you in particular, into mics and you're into gear and stuff like that, and like I could see you inadvertently taking it way too far, but like you just don't need, a $15,000 camera to make a video.
No,
like
it ain't
that.
gonna
And
be
some
anything.
people will do stuff like that. And so, if I was just playing around, I would probably do like a good mirrorless DSLR, a couple of those Sonys that are like, they're really nice cameras. I've seen people who get like incredible, shots with those. It's more about how to use the equipment than the equipment itself.
Yes, I think that's very true, actually, because I had this. I was working with a nurse yesterday, and she was talking about how she's into photography apparently, and so she was showing some photos of wildlife. It's the weather's good here now. The days are long again. Sunsets at 8 o'clock. That time of year. And so she was showing all these photos, and I'm like, "Oh, that's nice." It's nice camera on your phone. And she went, "Oh no, I didn't take these with my phone. I took these with my Nikon something. I don't know, cameras, right?" And I kind of went, "Okay, well, they look nice." And she said, "Oh no, I'd never take these photos with my phone. I mean, you can't get good photos with a phone camera." And I went,
"Oh, but you can.
Let me show you some photos."
Yeah.
And I showed her some photos of our one of my holidays, and she was like, "Actually, that's really good. Actually, that's really good." And I think, and I'm not trying to big my smartphone camera up, but I think framing and being able to get a good shot is more important than the actual fidelity and quality of the thing that you're using. In the same way that Eric said, you can do a lot with not a lot. And nowadays, actually, with some of the things that we have, the smartphones and the tablets and whatever, we can do pretty good.
So here's
without necessarily going,
yeah,
the whole hog. And now I suppose at some point there is a point of, so I mean, I get the feeling that you get to a certain point when the jump in quality is worth it, and then you get to a certain point where any extra expenditure only gives you minimal gains. And I don't know enough about cameras and
well, here's the struggle
I've to say where they are.
Yeah, here's the struggle I got.
Exist.
And it's got nothing to do with picture quality or anything. The struggle I've got is with being able to work with multiple cameras. So the bottleneck you run into on any system really is when you use webcams, you've got them plugged into the USB bus controller, and most of those can only handle no more than maybe 2 cameras. Now, I built a machine with some really expensive X16 USB cards in it so that I could hook up multiple cameras, and I thought I had a system that was going to work really well. But when I got it down there, because I had to use we have to use a lot of extension wires, and I've got the highest speed USB extension cables you can get, or that I can get, and it's still, when you try to film with multiple cameras hooked up to OBS, it will shit the bed. Okay, so how do you deal with that? Well, the professional cameras, the DSLRs, are all HDMI, which means you've got to have an intermediary device, which is how it's done. They use these little studio devices that's got a screen, and you've got the ability to put all. It's basically making your OBS studio
hub in a way.
Yeah, you're making it hardware in a way.
Yeah.
And that's how you manage. And then that device is hooked into the computer, and the computer recognizes that device as the camera, and then that device becomes the thing you use to switch around. That's the professional way of handling multiple camera angles, because OBS will do all these things, switching back and forth between the guest and the whoever's speaking and whatnot. But
you know that with production, and I've learned this the hard way too. Hardware will trump software any day.
Yeah, that's what I'm running up against here.
Yep.
So so you can take, and we bought some of these little devices, and these things are not cheap. These little devices that take a USB camera and turn it into an HDMI signal. They're about $160 for these little things. It's like a converter. And they're okay, but there's a bit of lag involved by the time it goes through all of that abstraction to get switched over into an HDMI, and then it goes through that device. And then keep in mind, we've got that device hooked to the computer as a video source, but then we've got a mixer board connected to a separate USB as the audio source. And there's optimizations you can do to line up things and whatnot, but the more hardware you put in between start and finish, the more places where things are going to be, where the more opportunities for latency. So that's what we're up against right now. So everybody else, all the professional people, instead of having, like, I think we had about 9 USB cameras, like C920s and C930s hooked up. We had like 9 of them. They'll have maybe 3 decent DSLR cameras hooked directly up to one of these devices. I don't know how to use one of them. Dave's got one, and we had it sitting there kind of making it look like we knew what we were on about. But all he really had it doing was piping camera feed to a screen behind him, making people feel like they're on, live or whatever. And it worked. It had kind of a carnival effect on people as they walked by,
they stop and watch it because I gotcha.
They think they're on TV or whatnot. And because I didn't take the time, I thought I had the whole thing figured out, because when I tested the machine, I had a bunch of, because it should have worked. These cards are super high speed, and when I had Arch on them, here we go. I had Arch on the machine.
You and Archie?
When I had Arch on the machine, it worked perfectly fine. I put Mint on the machine thinking, what difference could it make? And then I did not test it after putting Mint on the machine, and I took it down to Louisville and hooked it up, and it shit the bed. So
that's interesting. That's kind of the opposite way around for what you'd expect, isn't it?
And I'm here to tell you that what you expect when it comes to like hardware enablement, you're getting, if there's any improvements made, you're going to get it first on something like Arch.
Well, not only that, but the interrupts and the way that you think about something like Mint, and this is the argument for something like Arch, right? Mm-hmm. Arch is going to not have a bunch of services running in the background, or daemons, and different processes that are eating up. And yes, one little process that fires off every so often isn't going to make all the difference in the world. But in aggregate, whenever you have a system like Mint that's got dozens or hundreds of those processes that could potentially fire off, randomly, when you're not expecting it. And this is something I dealt with real time. Like I was, again, going back to that conversation about editing audio and like trying to do some of it real time and using a real time kernel and stuff like that, was like that latency made such a huge difference in those extra processes that might be running. Like having a machine that was dedicated and stripped down to being like the barest essentials, like a studio type machine, and then only running what you absolutely needed to run on it, and it was your capture system and all that. Like, but again, I kind of go back to, I think there is that point of diminishing returns where you can do so much on a normal, just generalized PC, but then like you're saying, hardware, I got to the point where it was like there was only so much I could do with a computer, like a x86 processor based system, to where it was like, well, now I want to really start looking at audio hardware, like where I could be doing these filters, where I could be doing this mixing on a physical device that's dedicated hardware, versus trying to, basically you're trying to undo the stuff that a computer's doing, because they're general purpose machines, and you're like, no, I want this to be very focused and specific. And that's why, believe it or not, something like Arch is better for that, because you don't have all that extra stuff, whereas Mint is trying to be all things to all people. So it actually does, it may sound counterintuitive, but it does make sense.
And it's interesting too, because I was looking to solve something I thought that was a problem just the other day. One problem I think people run into, and they probably don't even know they've run into this problem, is Arch by design. If you install a piece of software and that piece of software has a systemd service associated with it, Arch does not just enable that service by default the way every other distribution does. If you install something that's got a systemd service on Ubuntu or Mint, it will enable, and in some cases instantly enable, meaning it's ready to go right now. You don't have to do a reboot. Arch does not do that, and I thought, okay, that's a problem. That seems to me like a philosophical decision in design. Is there a way to set Pac-Man up to where when it installs a package, it searches for systemd units and then enables them? And what I found was that the reason it is done the way it is because some packages or some pieces of software have contradicting units that depending on the way you want to use that piece of software, you might run either a service that runs all the time or a socket that waits for something to happen and then run the service. And you've got the choice between the two ways of doing it, whereas with these distributions, these curated distributions like Ubuntu and Mint, somebody has made the decision for you as to how that piece of software is going to run. And so it got me to thinking, well, that's probably a good thing, because that's one of the reasons, maybe, as you said, you've got less abstraction, you've got less automation running in something like Arch, and that might be part of the reason why you have this perception of better performance and whatnot. But the trade-off, or the sacrifice you have to make, is knowing that there are things that you're going to have to do in addition. In this case, if you install a piece of software, I'm struggling to come up with and I know that I install the stuff all the time that needs a systemd unit running, but I can't think of an example off the top of my head right now. But I think that's a problem that people run into, is they'll install something and then it won't work, and they don't really know why. Because
I think this is something broader about Linux, actually. One of the things that a lot of us as Linux enthusiasts want to do is to try and spread the message, as it were, get more and more people onto the bandwagon. And most of the normies just want a plug and play, it just works type of paradigm. And so distro maintainers, Mint Team, Canonical, Red Hat, whatever, have to make some decisions to try and cater to that not cater, bad way of putting it, to try and attract that audience. And that is good and that is necessary, but it has its pitfalls. And I think this is one of those pitfalls, which is that it does mean that for people who are doing maybe quite specialized work, or people who are using it in specific use case scenarios, you don't have the same amount of control on something like Mint or Ubuntu that you would on something like Arch. I think it's value of the strength of the Linux ecosystem that we have something like Arch, that for those people that do need those bleeding edge packages, for those people that do need some specific software to run in a specific way with specific hardware or whatever, those options are available. If you look, across the operating system landscape, whether you're looking at Windows or you're looking at Mac OS, that's just not there. At least not that I'm aware of in the same way. You can't fine tune your system to make it exactly how you want it for the work that you want to do. So I think, this is one of the. I remember. I think a couple of episodes ago, I asked the question of, who actually does need something like Arch or a rolling release like that that's bleeding edge, and I think you've just actually answered that question, because this is something in which something like Arch would excel, as opposed to something like Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora, whatever.
Yep.
And as I said, I think we're lucky in that sense that at least we have those options that we can kind of go down that road, rather than being stuck with trying to fight with Windows or fight with Mac OS to try and get it to do what we want it to do.
That same fight, it's interesting you say that, because that is the same thing you hear from people who have been using. So someone might come in from Windows or Mac and they start using Linux, and they'll use something like Ubuntu or, a Fedora, something that's like a general purpose release, and they'll be happy with that as they're learning it. But then they start to realize, like, well, there's things in my way. Same thing, right? There are decisions that were made for me that are making it difficult for me to accomplish what I need to do, like what I'm really trying to get done here. Like specialist needs, again, people making content or scientific process. There are going to be types of computing that are not just sit down in front of it and use it as is. And those are the people then that start looking at, okay, what is really out there for me? And yeah, Arch comes up a lot because of exactly that reason, because it is what you need it to be, and really nothing else. Yes, there's a little bit more learning curve, but I contend that if you're getting something for that effort, right? This is an argument I make for newer people who don't really understand the lay of the land, and it's like, well, why do you want to use something that's that specific? If you're just trying to really understand Linux and understand how it works, but just start with something more basic, more general, and Mint is easy. It's user friendly. It's something that really makes your life simple whenever you're trying to do that. But then, okay, if you need to do the extra work or you want to learn something more in depth, that's when it makes sense to go more towards something like an Arch or, Nix, or like there are other systems out there that are more determinate. Like you're telling it specifically what you want instead of just inheriting a bunch of stuff and then having to undo to get to like the underneath of all of that. So yeah, Arch exists for a good reason, not just because people are elitists, not just because people have a certain strong opinions about things. It's because it really does work very well in those types of situations.
That elitist thing is,
and I think it's interesting that Valve used an Arch-based Linux for the Steam Deck. I do.
I think it's probably the same situation, though.
I think it's exactly the same situation.
Something like Ubuntu, yeah, they were like, well, we'd have to go in here and rip out all this stuff that's in the way to get to the essence of the system. So.
And they probably needed up-to-date kernels all the time. That's whenever a hardware vendor goes to something like that, it's almost certainly because they need access to what is the best of what's available right now, and that's, I think, first place is going to be something like Arch, and second it's probably going to be something like Fedora. I think aren't they using the Fedora base now, or is it still an Arch base? Or am
For
I thinking the Steam Deck? Is that still an
For
Arch
Steam
base?
Deck?
no,
It's
no. The
still
Steam
Arch.
Deck is
Okay.
still Arch.
Okay.
I think you're thinking Asahi.
Oh, that's yeah.
Yeah, because Asahi moved over to Fedora base, if I'm correct.
And that makes sense too, because Fedora is kind of not quite as bleeding edge as Arch is, but it's close enough to get a lot of the advantage of new kernel features and things like that. That the Elite thing with Arch, I've kind of watched people become Elite when they're using it, that they didn't start off that way. They went through this huge learning process with Arch and happened to uninstall it and reinstall it several times, and then once they finally get it to work, then they show up on the Arch forums. Yes. Did you read the fucking manual?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's what is it? You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Innit? That's exactly what it is. All these people that were like, "Oh, I'm not gonna be one of those guys."
No.
And then, 6 months later, yes, RTFM, you noob.
See, this is why we don't want new people in this ecosystem. And it's unfortunate, but it's funny. It's why it's.
I mean, it's human nature. It's human
nature.
It
is.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of is. I've got you could look at my forum posts. A couple of them, I wish I could get them deleted because I really got cussed out, and I didn't respond well to it, and I don't want people going out and seeing that nowadays that I'm doing stuff like this. If you let the people get to you on there, they'll go back and forth with you on it, and because it's like most things on the internet, people have just gotten way too used to being able to say whatever they want without getting hit in the face.
Well, I don't know if that's going to be the way in this new brave Trumpian world.
Oh, God.
People are getting deported for all sorts of shit. It seems having the wrong tattoo is what I heard today.
Yep, that's exactly what's happened to.
Yeah, got somebody deported, and freedom of speech. Yeah, freedom of speech as long as you agree with what I say. Yeah. If you don't agree with what I say, then be off with you, off with your head. Kind of like a less attractive and oranger Louis the 15th.
Fortunately,
that's quite a highbrow reference. Actually, maybe I shouldn't have.
Well, anyway. I mean, it is what it is. I'm thankful that I at least it seems like I should, just because of my situation, I should be able to hunker down and just get through the next 4 years and hope that we don't throw out the law completely. And the guy can't live forever, and I can't believe he's lived this long. There, I said it.
Yeah, but I mean, but see, what worries me is the number 2. That guy's a little shit, man.
Yeah, but he's without. Okay, so without the big energy behind him, he's gonna fold up like a cheap tent. Okay. There's a lot of voices out there that only exist because this greater force is giving them the space to do it, and I don't believe, because I mean, have a good look. None of this existed prior to him on any meaningful level. People had stupid opinions. They had stupid ideas of how things should work. We really shouldn't talk about this stuff, but
yeah,
it's potentially damaging. It is damaging. It has done some serious damage.
Because actually, this does flow into another conversation, actually, which is something that, I, in a way of trying to get myself stop thinking about recent events, I started looking back into cloud providers again, and I found out a couple of things. So apparently, there are laws going around. We're talking about not so much outlawing encryption, end-to-end encryption, but making it very difficult, asking for backdoors and stuff like that. Now, you might say, oh, that's nothing new. People have been talking about this for a while. But when you actually drill down into it, so for example, the EU is now at the moment debating a directive about whether there should be having a backdoor should be mandated on encrypted services. Now, it's unlikely to go through, apparently, but the fact that it's even a question is a bit surprising. We've obviously heard about Apple not doing end-to-end encrypted in the UK and EU because, again, of certain demands. When I started looking into other kind of encrypted cloud storage providers, if the servers are in certain places, then they can say as much as they want that it's end-to-end encrypted, but they still have to give they still have to give access. If the server's in America, then Patriot Act and all these other kind of things come into play. Or if it's in Australia, it comes part of the Five Eyes network. So you have to really kind of, if privacy and security is really that important to you and you want your files to be as safe as humanly possible, then you really have to go searching around. And this is again why I'm so annoyed that Proton don't have a Linux client, because the minute they have a Linux client, it's like, take my money.
Yeah, and
do you know what I mean?
The very idea, or if there was a backdoor to any of these services, that completely, in my opinion, negates the entire definition of end-to-end encryption. You can you can no longer claim that you are end-to-end encrypted if that system has a backdoor to it, because if the government can get access to that backdoor, I promise you, some knucklehead sitting in some basement somewhere can access that backdoor, because governments are nowhere near as organized as people think they are, as the movies make them out to be.
What you need to always look at on a server, whether you're setting it up yourself or renting it, is you can create your own keys. Yeah. If you create your own keys and you encrypt your own data, that data is safe. Yeah. There is nothing they can do to decrypt it. Nothing within reasonable limitations if you set it up right. So yes, they may have certificates on their servers. There are certain things they have to do, and those, yes, they can allow an entity, law enforcement, somebody to come in, and that's just standard operating procedure. And that's what any cloud vendor, that's what, Google's cloud or Microsoft, like they're all the cloud services run that way. They have their own layer of encryption, which is their own level of security, and that's good because there has to be some amount of control there. That's what you're logging into their control panel and, configuring their services and stuff. But if inside of your own containers or inside of your own services, you set up your own encryption, that's what makes it safe. And that's what pisses them off. That's what they don't want and frankly, I have nothing against law enforcement. I really don't. But I have to be honest and say that I think a lot of this comes out of just general laziness. Because there are ways for them to find this data or find information. Like everybody runs back to CSAM or runs back to, these hot button issues, which of course they happen. Yes, they are a problem. I'm not defending anything like that. I'm just saying that you're throwing, like Bill said, if you give one person access, that means you've given everyone access.
Yeah.
Like encryption is an all or nothing thing. It either is encrypted or it isn't.
Yeah. Either your door is locked or your door isn't locked.
Exactly. And, I personally don't necessarily have a problem if I'm letting a vendor manage encryption for me, then it's a partnership, right? And I have to trust them to do a certain level of, it is a lot of trust. But if I really want to know that something is secure, then, it's just like how,
encrypt it and then send it up there.
Systems. Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's why, all of your devices have a way to have an encrypted folder that is just your folder, or your computer does that. Windows has Microsoft gives you a way to have encrypted folder on your device. And that is secure because you're creating the keys, you're managing them, and you're the only one that has that information. So that's really what you have to think of, is like, who's creating the encryption. And if it's not you, then yes, it's open. It's potentially open,
And so that's why I started looking into these things, Cryptomator, which seem to be the services where you can use a normal cloud provider like
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft OneDrive, Google Drive, whatever it is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but then using the service, when if anybody else was just to log in to your Google Drive or whatever, they just see gobbledygook. You have the key.
Right.
It's all encrypted, and then you go through there. You go through the app and the program, and then you can see your actual files. And so I've
I mean,
started looking at that.
you've heard of end-to-end encrypted, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And if you're using a service that's end-to-end encrypted, like WhatsApp is, it's maybe not the best example, but
No, Signal
basically it
is.
means that on the device, or Signal, yeah, it means that on the device itself the data is locked and encrypted before it's ever sent anywhere.
mm,
And then once it's off your device, nobody can see or know or do anything with it other than to know that there's some amount of data that's going somewhere. So it's not
and
like and then in order for the other person to see it, they have to have that same encryption key, and so it's not.
so that's
You're
my
absolutely
point.
right. If you use Crypt or something like that, then yes. If you use Google Drive or iCloud or something, then it's an extra level of security, and you don't have to worry about whether you trust them or not.
Yeah, but see, that's my point about that a lot of the services that say that they're end-to-end encrypted, I'm not going to name names, but um, that are out there on the cloud storage side, when you start digging into it, they may be not as end-to-end encrypted, if you know what I mean.
I think the
You know,
problem
they're,
is to make it palatable for normal people. Encryption is kind of, I think it's a challenge for some of these people that are wanting to
Right.
provide services, because the whole concept of symmetrical and asymmetrical encryption is kind of difficult to explain, and then it's difficult to wrap your head around. I mean, I don't have a problem with just executing a GPG taxi, then the file name, and then you put a password on it. I don't have a problem doing that, but I'm somewhat technical. I understand this concept of a public key and a private key. It's a bit difficult. It's difficult for normal people to wrap their head around, and it's difficult for somebody providing a service to make that work in a way that is less technical, I suppose.
no, I mean that's true. I get that, but I mean you do have, as I said, some cloud storage providers that are end-to-end encrypted, and if you didn't know that they were, you probably wouldn't. The only step that you see extra
Yeah.
on that compared to if you were just making any other kind of cloud storage is that they'll give you, okay, here are some keys, you need to remember these keys because these are the keys that you need to, if you ever forget your password, this is the way that you're going to get back into your data, and if you can't decrypt it, if you lose this, then we can't do anything about it, tough luck. um so I think that it is better. I just think that the logistics are the issue because, as I said, yeah, if you're a company in the States and build all these servers and you want to, say, okay, our USP is end-to-end encrypted cloud storage. Well, you can't. You just can't. The law won't allow you. The law will still turn up and say, yeah, we want access to the data, and it's the same in the UK and it's the same in certain other countries, and that's why, as I said, you need to find out where the servers are located
Yeah.
to find
No,
out,
you're absolutely
you know,
right. And that's why
you know,
Proton does as well as it does, is
yeah,
because their servers are located in countries that
Switzerland.
don't necessarily have the same.
It's almost like the somebody labeling something as organic, and then you find out like, oh well, it's all that means is that they did this one thing, and it's not really
They
organic.
wash
It's
the
just
Yeah,
pesticide off with
yeah,
cold water.
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So I mean, yes, there are probably lots of services that are claiming to be secure, but I don't know that if they actually say end-to-end encrypted and they're not end-to-end encrypting something, then that's fraud, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But if they're just doing the blanket, like, oh, well, your data is secure, well, then that could mean anything, just like organic could mean anything.
I
So
just,
good on you for at least
I,
looking
yeah.
into it.
yeah. I mean, I think on a factual level, they're being correct. yes, it is end-to-end encrypted, but it's not necessarily secure. I reckon it's actually the other way around because of that fact that servers are in X country and X country's laws allow government to turn up and say, give us access to this data, and you need to have the encryption key so that you can open it for us.
When you're letting somebody else do the key management, when you're leaving the key management up to somebody else, you cannot say, unless you are managing the keys yourself, you cannot say that the data is secure.
Well, and if you go into something that is and encrypted, it should show you that your key is this, and like there are ways to actually prove, that something is secure. So,
it is true, obviously, that this is a significant overhead, I suppose, for a company, and at the end of the day, companies are trying to make money. We live in a capitalist system, and so it's probably not surprising that that when you do get onto one of those services that is a bit more privacy security focused, that you can trust the end-to-end encryption, stuff like that, they're not as usable. They're not as it just works type of thing in the same way, and that's what I've been finding. Nothing is bad. I'm not trying to put shade on any provider out there, but you can definitely see that they've had to put X amount of money into sorting out that security aspect, that the other kind of things of, like, I don't know, collaborations or sharing of files or integrations with third party services and integrations with word processors and Office and all that sort of stuff. They're going to have to take a back seat because you've only got a finite amount of money for your company and for your company to move forward. And so that's what, but then again, this is the whole thing about convenience versus either convenience,
and that convenience is going to win out every
versus
time.
Openness or everything, and
the convenience and the integration factor, the convenience and integration, that's going to win out over the security every single time, because people want their applications to integrate with each other in a way that is useful. I'm not saying people don't care about the security, but I think it will always take a back seat to
there is a trade-off, isn't there?
Yeah.
And maybe the more technical you are, maybe the more adept you are at this, then maybe your threshold changes. You're maybe willing to accept a lot more because you know what you're getting. But yeah, if you literally have no idea of any of this stuff and you just want to be able to just click and play, and you're a normie, not like anybody else, and I don't know if that's coming across as elitist, but my point, all I'm trying to say is that it does lead to a barrier to entry, and at a point then that somebody just goes, oh, you know what, why don't you just make it into a Google Doc, then at least we can all see it. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. It's interesting actually that our teaching timetable, my colleague with whom I organized the teaching, he's a great believer and lover of Google Docs and having everything up on there, and because it's so easy and we can access it and this, that, and the other. Except you can't access it from an NHS computer because the NHS rightly sees it as a possible data breach, and so you have to get specific access from IT to be able to access that specific Google Drive folder or whatever.
That's
so
interesting.
I thought to myself, it's interesting. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's interesting, that, isn't it?
So they literally see Google Docs as a data breach, or do they?
Basically most email providers, number one, right, and most cloud storage providers are seen. You can't access them off an NHS computer. I know we don't have one system that rules them all. Every hospital's got its own one, and this is a big bugbear, and lots of money has been wasted in trying to unify systems and have one consistent interface and all that sort of stuff. But the one thing I have noticed, there's certain things you can go into any hospital and you can be sure you're not going to be able to get onto your Gmail, you're not going to be able to get onto your Outlook if it's a personal account, you're not going to be able to access OneDrive or Google Drive, you're not going to be able to plug in a USB stick. These things you're just not, unless you specifically go and in fact in most you won't even be able to use YouTube, and things like that, because as far as they see it, is this is this is potential that we could lose data. This could be an attack vector, and so we're just closing it all down.
I guess I could kind of see their point to a
No, I
degree.
agree with them. I don't
Yeah.
disagree with them at all.
Yeah.
I think it might. I think it's fine. It makes life a bit annoying.
Yeah.
But I understand. I'm just saying that it's interesting, isn't it? We're all talking about security and privacy, but when an organization that needs to keep things private and secure and actually often messes that up,
and understand
doesn't
too,
allow a lot of these services.
Yeah.
That's probably a veneer of security in a lot of ways, because I'm sure if you actually know how they do it, you can probably circumvent it. It's just like putting security controls on your kid's device, and they're going to figure out some way to get around it. And that's okay, because really in the letter of the law, what you're trying to do is you're trying to, demonstrate that, okay, I have done my best due diligence to put in place a blanket security profile that, stops the easy ways to exfiltrate data by someone logging into a cloud service and dumping things out, or, or being able to bring data in a way like plugging in a USB device and stuff. And those are all good policies, sort of first blush policies to have. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's when it stops you from being able to do reasonable things. And that's, again, the compromise between how much security is enough to cover your 90th percentile likelihood of something happening versus being so cumbersome that you can't actually do what you need to do to be functional. And, yes, that's that small piece of ground is where a lot of those, problems arise, because that's where someone can come in and find a way to get around those securities that are in place. But at the same time, like, you can't possibly account for every single thing. It's like having, the best security system on your car, and someone just comes and plucks it up with a tow truck. I mean, there's only so much you can do to stop something from happening before it becomes either impossible to take as far as you would need it to, or makes it so unusable or cumbersome that you've now basically rendered that thing, pointless, because you can't do what you're supposed to do with it. So, and I don't envy companies like the NHS or any company that has thousands and thousands of users trying to do all these different projects and things, but still being held accountable, because guess what? If there's some kind of stupid breach, guess whose ass is going to be on the line? It's going to be the IT group who's like, well, why did you let them plug in a USB device? Well, because they told us they needed to,
Yeah, and so. It's interesting because I do have an extra work laptop, which is there primarily so that I can view patient records, because that's not something that I can, it's got its own VPN and Cisco something or the other. And I was using it to try and access something, and it wouldn't let me do it. And so I asked IT, and it turns out, because I use that rarely, because most of the time if I'm checking out patient records, I'm doing it from on site. I'm not doing it from home. I'd used it so infrequently that it had now dropped off the network, and they couldn't even update it remotely, and so I actually had to bring it in, and they had to basically redo, wipe the computer and start all over again. And the reason why I use it so rarely is because of that same fact, that it is so cumbersome. I have to log into the VPN, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do, to get the access from outside. To which I think to myself, you know what, I can wait till I get into the hospital tomorrow to check this out. I don't need to see it right now. And so and I use my own personal devices to do the other stuff that I need to do for work, which is email or making presentations and stuff like that, because it's just so much easier than using the device that they've given me, because of all the barriers that they've put up, which again I completely understand. I'm not trying to say that they shouldn't. I understand why it is, but yeah, it's that payoff between security and privacy and convenience. And I remember that there was one of my colleagues who would only ever do anything work related on that laptop that was issued, whether even if it was just checking his email, whether it was, doing a presentation in PowerPoint or whatever, because it was like, this is what I use for work. This is what work gave me. I'm going to use this. But the rest of us who, he wasn't the most technical, to be completely honest, and nearly everybody else who is a bit more, maybe, has got their own device. They'll end up having two with them. Do you know what I mean? One for the rare occasion they need to check some actual confidential data, and the other for the 99% of the time, then all they want to do is check their email and, write a document.
So they're not blocking these services on a network level. They're just like you can take your own device in there and get on Google Docs and things like that, but it's just the devices that's interesting. That almost makes it a half measure.
Well, it always amazed me the number of people whenever I was doing office-wide sort of hardware support, the number of people that you would give a work laptop to that would do not only personal but like very personal things on it, and you would like be cleaning it off and because they've got 100 viruses, and you're like, dude, don't do that on here. Like, you come on, like get your own device. Like, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not that guy, but like, come on, man. Like, just think about what you're doing.
Get Linux, get LibreWolf.
Yeah, like think about what you're doing. That's all.
Yeah, I've got a LibreWolf. Okay, I've actually got a LibreWolf story actually. So, my little experiment of moving away from Firefox and using LibreWolf, but with Bitwarden as my password manager, finally died yesterday, where I got annoyed that for the umpteenth time I couldn't access a particular site properly, and I just thought, okay, that's it. I'm done now. I'm done.
It's just not built for that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not even talking about something like some really super niche website. What was I on? I was trying to find a list of compatible Windows ARM software. Yeah, and there's a website that has a searchable index, community made, finding which apps have got a native client, which apps are emulated, and all that sort of stuff. It just would not work. This website would just not work.
LibreWolf has got HTTPS only cranked all the way up. LibreWolf has uBlock Origin on there cranked all the way up, and every other privacy and security setting is turned to the max. It's completely ephemeral. Nothing you do on that browser is remembered after you close the browser out. I'm surprised you can even keep bookmarks on it because it is that ephemeral. So you got to turn all that stuff off. And by the time you do that, in my mind, like, well, why didn't I just install Firefox?
On Firefox, exactly. Why didn't I just use Firefox?
Because you're using Firefox anyway, and the reality is without Firefox, LibreWolf ceases to exist because that is not a project that could go on its own steam by any means. None of them can. I'm sorry. None of these projects could go on without. I mean,
even though I ranted, twice about, Mozilla and stuff like that, that's just the facts of life, isn't it? The facts of life are that without Firefox, all of this stuff doesn't happen. And so that's why it's never been that's why it's not a solution for people to say, oh, I'm so fed up with Mozilla now, I'm going to move to Floor or Zen. It's like, but
we all know who you're talking about.
No, I mean,
but
in general,
it's true.
I mean, I've been that guy. I'm not going to lie. I've been that guy when I got so annoyed that I thought, you know what, forget this. I'm going to move over to Floor or...
Let's use a bigger example. Could Vivaldi continue on without Chromium? Could any of these projects keep going without?
Very difficult for any of them.
Really.
No.
The problem is it's not so much that they can't. So when you fork it and you are sort of, it's just like how Mint forks. Will fork, a piece of software and then use the guts of it. I mean, that will work to a certain extent, but then if there's any kind of vulnerabilities, like you then now take on the ownership and responsibility. Like the approach of a lot of these, especially browser downstream browser vendors or developers, is they're always going to be bringing in the latest version and then just putting their stuff on top of it, right? It's a layer. It's their own sort of Chrome, Chrome being like the UI layer and whatever. Like, and that's kind of what Vivaldi does and what all these other browsers do, because if they were to have to take on ownership of the underlying code base and all of that totality of it, including security and all the rest of it, it's just too much. I mean, you're talking about a company who's already spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on development in Mozilla to build this thing. And then it's just like someone using Ubuntu downstream. Like, they're not going to just take over the Ubuntu code base and then say, okay, well, we pulled it once and we're never going to come back again. Like, no, you're going to come back every single time there's another, release, because you have to, you can't possibly do.
No, you're right. And I think, I sometimes wonder whether maybe the Chromium policy that Google has, the Chromium is an open source project. Google Chrome is their proprietary browser based on that. AOSP is the Android open source project, and Android is the thing that they sell and market and whatever. I wonder if maybe Mozilla should go down that line and have, okay, this is the open source bit, and this is the thing that we are actually selling, or this is what this is the product. One is the project, and the other is the product.
That's what. Chromium, and then they built
Eric's
Chrome
on his AOL internet today.
Yeah, you keep freezing, man.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I have to get new Wi-Fi hardware. I'm really sick of these, and I'm in the process of doing so. But yeah. Anyway, that's what Chrome's does, because Chromium is the base, right? That's the open source project, and then Chrome is built on top, and then Vivaldi and anyone else that's doing that as well. So, I mean, theoretically, Mozilla could do that, but I don't really see. They don't have it's almost like Android, right? Like Android, it can be an open source project, and then people can take Android and build it for their hardware, but there's a market for that.
Not only that, I mean,
there's so much complexity in.
From Google's perspective, what was the purpose of letting everybody have Chromium to build their browsers on? Well, they wanted everybody plugged into their data engine. They wanted everybody on that train. They're in the business of collecting data and advertising and things like that. Mozilla, no, not so much. They have to focus on their end product a little bit more. It'd be all fine and good to say, okay, we've got a usable base browser that you can build. We now have made the Gecko engine architected to where it can be separated from the Firefox browser, to where it can be used in other browsers. And that's all fine and good, but the reason that works for Google is because that's the kind of company that is making... They're profiting from the data that they're getting from the users, because whether you're using Chromium or Chrome, you still have those APIs that it connects to, and that's all on the Google servers. Whether you're using Vivaldi, you're using Chrome, or you're using Edge, it's still using a lot of Google guts, a lot of Google brains to make all that work. And boy, did they know what they were doing when they came up with that. Because now they've got people plugged into that data engine that don't even know it. They've got everybody using Windows. They're actually using Google. Because they've made Chromium, the Chromium base, such a good option. So good that Microsoft gives up on making browsers altogether. Why should we make a browser when this is great? We can just put our tooling on top of it and make a fantastic browser, and they did. I mean, it's true. But
I mean,
Well, and it also shows you the amount of effort that goes into maintaining that.
yeah,
The JavaScript engine, all that stuff that's under the hood that is just hugely complicated, and not only the building of it, but the maintaining, the testing, like the endless QA testing for all the different possible, everyone uses the web for everything. The browser is the most generalized piece of software you could possibly imagine, right? In terms of like the technologies it has to support, what's standards and not standards, and then you have Chrome bringing in things that aren't web standards and shoving that in, and then Mozilla has to respond to that, and like it's just this constant like game of trying to encapsulate all of the use cases for the web, which is enormous, and so of course even someone as big as Microsoft, if someone does that work for them and does it in a way that is palatable for them to be able to consume and build their own stuff on, of course,
no brainer.
So
Yeah. And so that's why I don't see that Mozilla is always going to do things that are going to upset some people, or they're going to they're going to do things or say things that are misunderstood. I really think they could stand to hire somebody that knows how to communicate with the open source community. That just seems, for all the money they spend everywhere else, hire one guy that knows how to talk to nerds, and have him or her explain this to us in a way that makes sense to us.
I mean, even like a focus group, just like an insider channel where you say, here, let me introduce this concept and see how you take to it. And if you have a bunch of questions or concerns, how about I deal with them ahead of time and then maybe take it out to the larger public? Like,
yeah. But for God's sake, they remind me, it makes me think, it reminds me of how people tend to talk around me sometimes, because I live in this blue collar world where people talk very plainly, but then, I talk the way I do and I get scattered and everything. Well, people, I've noticed, they feel like they have to sound smart around me for some strange reason. And that's kind of the way I feel whenever you read anything coming out of Mozilla, that it's a bunch of people that probably talk plainly, but now it's time to sound smart, so they put out this stupid corporate-y sounding language that just seems so unnecessarily convoluted. And you're wondering, who on earth are you talking to? Because this is, for everybody that's talking about what you are saying, it's coming across as just mindless corporate babble. I'm not hearing anybody talk about it like, the way you do, the way media responds when some other type of company comes out and does some sort of corporate-y sounding announcement. It's normal, but in this space, it just comes across not even condescending. That's the interesting thing about it. It's not even condescending. It just comes across as awkward and meaningless.
Just not very good.
Not
very good. Just a bit shit.
It is, and it's like you people never talk like, you clearly never talk like that, but you're trying to sound like big shots or something. I don't know. It just always comes across as weird and unnecessary. It's just hire one person. Just hire somebody that can talk to us.
Pay someone that actually knows how to talk. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, anyway.
We solve the world's problems.
Yeah. Hey.
In our usual hour of ranting and raving.
Let us know what you think, folks. Show at linuxotc.org. Hit us up on the few socials that we're on. What do we got? We got Discord and Mastodon. That's what we got. Or you could show up at Eric's house. He's always.
Hey man, I guess I'm the mascot for OTC.
Yeah, don't come here, for God's sake. Anyway, we will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Bill.
I've been Eric.
And I've been Majid.